First off, thank you so much for that warm and gracious introduction. For those of, any of you ever heard me speak before? I like to know the audience, okay? Those of you who've heard me speak before, and you can go back and look at the YouTube video, I did this, I was a commencement speaker at ETSU. I would get emotional at some point in this. I own it. This doesn't always happen. When I'm not among friends, I don't. And I'll just tell you, it is so great to see your faces. Some of you I've known for quite a while. Some of you I'm meeting for the first time today, but I've seen you around and you're legends in our community. And it is such an honor to be in the room with you. We were having a little bit of a conversation about one of my areas of passion, which is the DB Band. My wife and I are former presidents of the Band Boosters. We were vice chair, which they don't always tell you in advance, which is the logistics coordinator. At a time where, for the first time in band history, they did the Macy's parade, the presidential inaugural, and the Rose Parade. I never thought I'd be chartering 747 jets to get to Pasadena. This was when I was on the executive team at Eastman, so it was a little bit easier because I had a good relationship with Patrick Wilson at the airport, and we got to use an FBO that they otherwise wouldn't have let us use. And I understand that nothing good happens in this community except for the good that all of you have done in this community for a far longer time than I've lived. My wife and I have lived here. We moved here in '95, so we're starting to feel like, I can't say old timers, but for the first 10 years, if someone asked us, when'd you move here? We've been here 10 years, like, oh, you just got here. Just a little bit more background. It might feel like I just got here, but I actually did my genealogy when I came here. I have 4 sixth-generation grandfathers who marched over a mountain and 2 who fought on Kings Mountain. One was awarded land on the Holston River as a consequence, and I live on the Holston. I told you I just feel blessed every day. Get up on my back deck that Lindone helped me design. He designed it. I just was smart enough to sign off on it. And look at the river flow and feel the history where we live. And that's kind of a pivot to why I'm really passionate about and why I made a pretty dramatic change in what I wanted to do every day when I got up in the morning and work with the ETSU Research Corporation. If you know me, I'd like to think I'm a pretty strategic person. I try and think 4 or 5 years in advance. And one of the things is I was fortunate to be appointed, whether it's former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, who is just a fantastic person, Bill Haslam, and others, is I began to see a trend that I wanted to personally work on. And that trend, you'll see some elements in it, but we live in an increasingly competitive world. We live in a world where supply chains are so intertwined that there's this great paper published in 1972 titled, "Will the Flapping of Butterfly Wings in Brazil Cause a Tornado in Texas?" So Ed Lorenz, famous climate scientist, father of chaos theory, wrote it. And increasingly with intertwined value chains, literally a sneeze in a foreign country can change the globe. And so when you look at our history and how important it has been for the history of our country, one of the questions that occurred to me is, do we need to do something maybe a little bit differently so the next 100 years is as prosperous as the last years have been? To put our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren on a trajectory to enjoy the prosperity that we have been blessed to join. If you study human history, you see cultures that do well and cultures that do poorly. And one of the real differentiators is, number one, how naturally curious are they? How open are they to research, to looking at things differently? Number two, how open are they once they understand a particular insight to make something happen? So I would call that research, innovation, to take that insight and then do something new with it that doesn't exist, and then application, make it happen. And when you look at what we're good at in our region, it's amazing how much incredible world-class research goes on in our region, but because our mamas all taught us don't brag, almost nobody knows it. I was touring our medical university. We've got a world-class medical university here in our region. Did you know that they're doing cutting-edge HIV research? That they're on the cusp of curing HIV? Did you know that they're doing some cutting-edge COVID research? They have amazing scientists and incredibly expensive equipment, and they're doing all this, but nobody's kind of telling the story. And at some level, if nobody tells the story, it didn't happen. And yet we're a region of storytellers, and we won't tell our own story. And so the confluence of we need more highlight of what our research is, and even more innovation, because sometimes innovation occurs in coffee shops. Right? Two people that don't know each other sit down and like, hey, you start to meet, and by the end, we're coming up with stuff neither of us have ever thought about. And then application, we are a region of doers. And there are certain places in the country I won't name because this is a polite crowd, that all they do is just think things to death. They don't ever get much done. And we are a region of doers. So we can do research, we can innovate, right? I mean, there's some areas of innovation historically that is very deep in our region. Distillation. Okay, I mean you might laugh a bit, but distillation's actually hard, right? I mean, to get it right, that is challenging. It's chemistry and it's physics and it's logistics, right? Why is Eastman here? George Eastman wanted to go to a place that knew something about distillation science, and innovative and creative and hardworking. That's why Eastman's here, right? If those of you know Scott Andrew, do you know Scott? He's doing some really interesting stuff around distillation and tourism. Makes sense. He's also writing what he hopes to be the definitive history of the country as it relates to distillation and fermentation. Did you know, distillation and fermentation are kind of close cousins, right? Right? Did you know that synthetic biology, which is the thing that a lot of us got vaccinated with, that the scale-up opportunity is actually fermentation? And when I tell you that, do you ask the question, why aren't we doing more about synthetic biology in our region? Because we're great at research, we're great at innovation, we're a country or a region of doers, and we have that science background. So those are some of the thoughts that were bouncing around as vice chair of the Board of Trustees, and as I see all this world-class talent on the university campus, I didn't see it working quite as well as maybe some other universities in those three areas of research, innovation, and application. And one of the reasons it wasn't, because every system that has ever existed works exactly as designed. Every single one of them. If you want a different output, you got to redesign it. To hope you get a different output and you don't change design, to paraphrase Einstein, is insanity. And so when you think about those three areas, and then you think about this, every human innovation that has ever positively impacted the world has been commercialized by a business somewhere. It's the application, it's the doing. And in certain quarters, to talk about business in a positive context is an anathema. It's evil. And yet, everything that we've ever benefited by innovation, there was a business somewhere behind it. Now, we can have a legitimate discussion around the leaders of some businesses and the depth of morality, which is a perfectly good conversation. But it's also interesting, and a conversation for another day, there's this movement on Wall Street of all places called ESG, which is driving conscience in corporate culture. Because we as shareholders are increasingly sick to death of putting your investments in places that create net negative because they don't get what we get in our region, which is we all live together, we all have to have common purpose, and we all have to treat our neighborhoods and our communities in a way as if there's going to be people who come after us who want to live here. That's just in our culture. And so let me give you an example. So of just the power of business to convene, connect, ideate, innovate, influence. This is 22 Gia Long Street in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. And some of you may recognize this building. This is actually an iconic building. I took this picture on January 23rd, 2020. Between my retirement and what I wanted to do next, I had this dream of spending 5 weeks in Asia, and the first 3 weeks were great. And the last 2 weeks, my wife and I were on a cruise ship that sailed in circles, and our cruise ship made the national paper and every major paper in the country because no country would take us. It was really fascinating and a conversation for another day, all right? But in case you don't recognize this, maybe you recognize this. It's the same building. And it's really cool. They're going to tear this building down probably in the next year or two, but it stood when I was there. And I might have given some money to the guy in the lobby to let me take the elevator up. Might have done that. And I got to stand, because I grew up as a child, the Cold War was very cold. And I remember, I had relatives who fought in Vietnam. And when you see this picture, right, we all recognize it if you come from a certain era. But here's the amazing thing: if you look at the amount of money that the United States spent in Vietnam, it's right at $1 trillion. Okay, and you have your own opinion of how successful or unsuccessful that conflict was, and trust me, I don't want to get into the discussion. But here's interesting: if you look over here, if you stand right here and walk over to that edge, you have to be careful, and you look really closely. There's a McDonald's. And it just struck me, the juxtaposition struck me as ironic that military force could spend $1 trillion and lives were lost, and it's still a communist country today. But McDonald's is everywhere. What does that tell you about the power of business? Among other things, it tells you if you deliver a product or service to somebody who wants it, and the owners get to keep some of the profit, which you can now in communist Vietnam. It's why they're increasingly increasing their standard of living, because farmers get to keep profits from their own farm and they become much more productive, which is a conversation for another. But the question is, how do we catalyze that in a way? Because if it can propel value creation, and there's a philosophical debate absolutely of how much value creation. Maybe if it were pals, we could make an even stronger argument of value creation in Vietnam and McDonald's. But the concept is that how do we piggyback and catalyze that? So that's one of the objectives of the Research Corporation. In fact, if I were to map it, I would say, this is what we want to work on. This is what we want to catalyze. This is what we want to be a central node in our region to drive more of this, to convene and connect. If you think about the convening entities at scale in our region, there's probably only about 3. And I'm not trying to minimize anything, but I'm talking scale, all right? Ballad Health has a big footprint. Ballad Health's really busy. Ballad Health runs healthcare. They're not going to do it. We have a wonderful corporation headquarters not far from here. They sell global chemicals. I got a little bit of experience there. I don't think they're going to do it. That leaves a university. And if you go and you look at other successful regions, there's almost invariably a university that's playing this role of convening, connecting. If you go to West Lafayette, my good friend Scott Neiswanger has taken me there just to make sure I knew what was going on. West Lafayette, anyone ever been to West Lafayette? Purdue's shooting the lights out, particularly over the last 10 years with the current president. You land at Purdue's airport. Amelia Earhart's plane, if it's ever discovered, that's a Purdue plane. She was on faculty when she went missing. Very, very interesting. They're doing great things. If you go to Silicon Valley, right? Stanford. Silicon Valley didn't create Stanford. Stanford created Silicon Valley. Kendall Square, it's a joint venture basically between MIT and Harvard and Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so when you say that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not proposing that we try and be Silicon Valley or West Lafayette. I want us to be us, because I think we can be really good at being us to do world-class things in a rural setting. Because when you put that layer on it, and I'll give you a couple of stories where that's worked well, increasingly, I always like, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, but I've had this conversation at MIT, for instance, with a synthetic biology startup company that might have just gone public, and say, why don't you partner with us? And they're like, oh, okay, now why would we partner with you? Well, we can do world-class things in a rural setting, and I assume you want to be influential around the world, not just in urban areas in Massachusetts. And they're like, well, yeah, you got me there. And I'm like, okay, so do you want to do yet one more partnership with Harvard on something? I mean, how exciting is that, right? MIT, Harvard, do one more thing, yay. Hey, that's not moving the needle. Do something that's going to make a headline. Go to a place that's cool in the mountains in Tennessee and do something great there. If you're on LinkedIn, how many of you are on LinkedIn? All right. If you do me a favor, if you just do this one thing, link in with me and find the Research Corporation LinkedIn page. You're going to see a picture of our chair, Linda Latimer, our exiting chair, Scott Neiswanger, President Nolan, at the preeminent oceanographic institution in the world at Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Met with the president. You might say, University in the mountains meeting with the preeminent oceanographic institution in the world. Turns out every other breath we take comes from the ocean, and water matters everywhere. And 97% of all the water on the planet's in the ocean. We live on that 3%, and it's a very small sliver of the 3% that's actually available for us. And yet, water is an asset for us. We take it for granted here. Trust me, if we lived in Arizona, we would not be taking it for granted. That is a natural resource. And so how do we reposition? Have a conversation with Woods Hole to say, hey, we'd love to be your freshwater partner because they have world-class scientists. It's just, this is the research and the innovation before we get to application. So convene and connect, ideate, and I'm giving you examples. Create and influence, to have an entity that maybe you have a crazy idea and you just want to bounce it off of somebody. Until the Research Corporation existed, we really didn't have a partner at scale that could do that. We haven't been in existence very long. I can tell you some of the walk-in traffic we've gotten. We're working on one it's probably going to result in a license that's going to start a business and generate a lot of income from outside of our region to come to our region. We're working with 2 early stage companies that are in New York City. Some of you may have been involved in one of the convenings that we did, and we always do partners. We always partner with others, okay, in doing it. As we like to say, we throw gas on your fire if you want a bigger one. If you don't have a fire, we got matches. If you are too humble to talk about yourself, we've got a big spotlight, and we're not you, so I'm not prevented from bragging about you, okay? I just walked out of a meeting with someone. We're under non-disclosure agreement, but I've run into this over and over. World-class company, headquartered here. Most of their business is done outside our region, but they love our region, so they live here. And almost nobody knows about this company. So, how do we spotlight? So if I were to, double click a little bit on, down a bit, so the initiatives to drive change, Center for Experiential Learning. Real world wants a certain type of student. Secret, universities are not always developing that type of student. Because the real world spins faster than a university, we can't change curriculum fast enough. So some of the things we're doing is creating experiential learning opportunities. So our students have 1 foot in the classroom and 1 foot in the real world, being coached by professors that have also had a lot of real world experience. I help teach the capstone MBA strategy class, and we've got 21 different clients, as far away as California, that our MBA students are working with. For instance, one that's in California going an outside the US export strategy for the particular thing that they do. And so that student's going to, when they go to interview and they go, hey, so what'd you do in college? Well, I helped this really great brand develop an international strategy. And that person's like, wow, we have not run into that today during interview. Because we're doers, right? We're not just thinkers. I won't ask for a show of hands because I think I know what you'd say, but let's say you were in charge of recruitment for the company you work for or have worked for, and you have 2 candidates, and one just is really interested in thinking things to death, and number 2 is going to actually do something, but really capable of higher thought. Who do you hire, right? And this plays into our culture, all right? iLab reposition, I get to work with the iLab. It's the innovation lab at Johnson City. Hopefully in the next bit, you're going to see a little bit more signage in our city here. because ultimately we need to play as a region, and that means we need to get the branding everywhere so people know what we're doing. But the iLab has, it pre-exists me. Again, great story. They've recruited several German companies that have located here through the soft landings. One of the iLab spinouts now makes custom circuit board that is needed in a robust environment, a violent environment. So they're in the F-16 cockpit, they're in NASCARs, and they're on Mars. That company's here. And if you ask the average person on the street, they wouldn't know about it. That spun out of the iLab. So one of the things we're doing is shining a bigger light on the iLab. I get to work with some other Fortune 500 companies, and one that has actually historically supported the iLab, not headquartered here. The iLab just did a project, helped engineer a project that has great relevance to them, and they didn't even know about it. And they helped support it. Their signage is on the iLab signage. I just happened to be at their headquarters the day after a press release was issued about, if you've ever heard of the circular economy, instead of things getting thrown away, things getting repurposed. And this not-for-profit based in London had an idea of going to like the CNNs of the world, because they always have to have the cutting-edge streaming technology, and so if it's a little bit out of date, it's gone. Well, it's still good technology in almost everywhere else in the world, just not at CNN. And so they're repurposing that in rural areas and developing countries, and then needed a partner. Well, they're about to relocate to Valleybrook, which actually has a Kingsport address. And so we have this London-based not-for-profit at Valleybrook who's about to work with ETSU to help repurpose this otherwise wasted equipment in developing countries. So who would have thought, yeah, our region is where that thing is going to land. So the press release actually had a picture of the iLab on it with the sign of this financial institution that they actually help enabled, and that's a big deal for, to enable things, and they didn't even know about it. And it just so happened I was at their headquarters that day and said, hey, did you see this? And so now that's probably going to get highlighted in their reporting. So you can see the value of connecting. Regional convener, and here, it's just a fact. What sometimes gets in the way of this is what biologists call the biological imperative. This is true with viruses, humans, countries, it doesn't matter, it scales. There's three things that happen if we're not careful. One, biology is humans, viruses, we're naturally territorial. We're naturally competitive, and we really want to perpetuate the species. And those three things are really, really hard to overcome. They explain a lot of the culture that we sometimes run into, what's euphemistically called the Friday Night Lights syndrome. And yet, we really need scale, because our competition is not Kingsport, Johnson City, Bristol, Greenville, Abingdon. It's not. Our competition isn't even other communities in the state of Tennessee. Our competition is much farther away. The Mayans learned this in a very, very powerfully negative way. If you're into Mayan history, the way the Spanish conquered them is there were actually multiple Mayan tribes. It wasn't one giant Mayan nation. They had multiple tribes on Friday nights. They would play games with each other. And that was, I'm just kidding. They wouldn't even do that. And so the Spanish came in and made friends with the local tribe. Yeah, how's it going? Good buddies. And then killed them. And then they'd go to the next tribe, get buddies, yeah, and then killed them. But because these guys didn't talk, they didn't see it coming. And so this small band of Spaniards who could have been overwhelmed on day one with the large group of Mayan tribes got wiped out. That and, the Mayan equivalent of COVID just put them under. We're living that environment if we're not careful. We absolutely can retain the identity of individuals and communities. That's not a problem, but we got to learn how to convene and connect and develop partnerships in a competent way. So Center for Experiential Learning, I kind of went through that. We're seeing that this is all kind of early days, right? The announcement went out in January. We were in the middle of COVID. Some other things got in the way. On the campus, things don't always move quickly on a university campus. The research found corporation's actually a separate 501c3. So we are capable of running much, much faster. You're going to see probably middle of November another partnership that we created with an entity on the West Coast that's this beautiful partnership between what we bring to the table that's best for us and what they bring that could be pretty historic. I wish I could talk about it now, but let's just say we already have a commitment from Variety magazine for a full page free ad on it, okay? And we're not even spun up yet. We just elected 4 new board members last week. One who's the Associate Director of Strategy, Research Strategy for the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Dr. Caroline Clayson, PhD aerospace engineer, tenured at Purdue, tenured at Florida State, tenured at MIT Woods Hole. Not bad, right? Denise Grant, who, she's my age and shames me on all the stuff she's done. She was a partner at a large law firm. She was Senator McConnell's chief of staff at one point. She was a senior executive for one of the largest financial institutions in the world. And she was managing director at one of the top 4 headhunter firms. And now she has her own strategic. She's a Washington, D.C. insider, but doesn't do lobbying, but knows everybody and bleeds blue and gold, but not from around here. So Denise is on it. Brian Daniels, I don't know if you know that name, Brian, ETSU graduate, undergrad, 2 degrees. He's, Brian, doing a pretty good job, would you say, down in Blount County. They're going to have, they always have great announcements. I wouldn't be surprised if you see another one next week there. But Brian is convening the economic developers. There's an international association. They're in Nashville in 2 weeks. I think I'm on a panel there. That's a big deal for the state. So Brian Daniels is on the board. And then some guy from Greenville who just can't seem to keep a company. He keeps selling them and taking them public. Scott Niswanger's on our board. That's not a bad start for a board, because part of what they do, they all bleed blue and gold, and they're all willing to help use their sphere of influence to run. iLab reposition, talked a little bit about this. One of the things that hopefully we see over time, it's a brand, not a location. We're going to see it more on campus to help the entrepreneurial efforts of our students across the campus, which is no small feat to get convening across the campus, and then outside. Some other iLab similar stuff that has gone well, we'll pick on our friends at Harvard. They have an iLab there, a venture program, because students, if we do the right education, are a rich source of startups. If we help them, they're not all right now that we see the pitches are scalable. They're more about traditional business, but so it's something. Valley Brook Development, some of the things that we're doing there. K-12 STEM Hub, Dennis Courtney says he's still alive and well. He's actually staying with me this week. Streamworks is still here. We're partnering with Woods Hole. MATE, did you see the World Underwater Robotics Championship came back to our region? Jill Zandy, the executive director, loves us and is very grateful that in a world of COVID that we figured out a way to get it done on a university campus that actually projected very well across the globe. And there's others, because one of the imperatives is to train the people coming behind us, right? I'll pick on one, BioBuilder. BioBuilder is synthetic biology education that was started at MIT. It's the #1 not-for-profit of its kind. The very first BioBuilder class launched in rural America was at Dobbins Bennett. Dr. Kuldell, who's tenured at MIT and started the synthetic biology program there, would tell you that it's the most successful first-year launch in BioBuilder history. So she's partnered with the Niswanger Foundation. They have a Department of Education grant to do that across our region. And that will naturally lead to things going on the campus and spin-offs. If you go to Cambridge, you'll see a lot of synthetic biology spin-offs. The 3 main applications for that are agriculture, materials, and medicine. Anyone think we can't do all 3? Ag, come on, we're going to beat Cambridge in ag, right? They don't have any land. Materials, there's right, a little material manufacturer. Medicine, right? So that I think can play well, and we're ahead of the game particularly. In fact, she wrote a day one white paper for the present administration arguing for more synthetic biology education. I know we're about out of time. The mayor's
questions here in a second.
Okay, so just to help you, the first plant genome took 500 people, 7 years, and $70 million. As of 17, you could do it by one person, 3 minutes, and $100. So think about the computer science revolution, and it's about 1981 in terms of cost now. For synthetic biology revolution, McKinsey says that market will grow up to $4 trillion a year for the next 10 to 20 years. Regional development, talked about that. This group probably doesn't need too much on this. You've lived it. It's a mountain we've been trying to climb. And then partnership development. And these two kind of go hand in hand, regional development and partnership development. If you study how to do that, sometimes a third party brought in changes the sufficient dynamic in a way that people work together. And I could give you examples where that's already going on. Some of what we're patterning after is Singapore. It's the #1 country in the world for doing this. So how do we do Singapore rural? Okay. Well, one of the reasons they did it is this guy, Dr. Swanjin Bay, brilliant guy, MD, so smart, so humble. So some of the design that we're looking at is what is Singapore doing and how do we kind of emulate that in a rural setting? This is Swanjin. He's singing the fight song now. He's a great guy. This is an interview I did with him during my time in Asia. So I'll conclude with this and we can do Q&A. This is one of my favorite quotes in the world. The worst labyrinth is not that intricate form that can trap us forever, but it's a single and precise straight line. We do not live in a linear world. We do not live in a linear society. Your brains are not linear. And when we mistake all that for linear, that's the trap. And so if I were to distill what we're trying to do with the RC, it's get out of this linear thinking in a very competent, high quality way and contribute to the prosperity of our region. So I hope that was useful.